this moment appears, in your case, a fall, in my case, a diagnosis. And yeah, I think one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough is that obviously people who need care feel very uncomfortable about that a lot of the time as well. My mum was also a very independent woman, and she was not happy about being vulnerable. And that makes it even harder for us.
But they were proud.
Yes, and I'm sure we would feel the same. And I think that's a cultural problem, right? That we're obsessed with feeling that we're kind of godlike, like free in this way.
It's very interesting, and I noticed in the beginning of your book, you talk about how you were helping your mother and how you were the only person who she could actually stomach, actually helping her in that way. Can you just...
Yeah. So doing things like intimate care, so bathing and helping with toilet things is obviously something that people find really difficult to have done to them. And I understand why, of course. And so she did prefer me to do it, even if she was in hospital and there were nursing staff that were around. I would sort of take her along to a disabled shower or what have you. And that was partly because, I'm her child, and I suppose she felt more comfortable with that, but also because when I was 1920, I had septicemia and nearly died myself. And I had nurses do those things for me. So I could talk to her about it in a way that was designed to be like, look, I've been here, to kind of chill her out about it. But one of the things that I noticed, and that made me write the book actually, is that I joined an online support group of carers in the last few months of my mum's life. And a lot of the time, the topics we were bringing was exactly this. How do you help your loved one not feel this horrific sense of shame about needing intimate care?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's no conversation about that. Adult incontinence wear has outstripped infant diapers in the market. Like that's what we're dealing with here, and it is just not talked about.
Why do you think we have this taboo around talking about it? Because you're absolutely right, and I recognise this because I've been in the same sort of situation that you're describing here, and there is no conversation. It's very awkward to have. And it's difficult also to get the support you need in terms of conversations around caregiving as well, because often, Emily, you talk about social care as well and all that, the more formalised element of it. A lot of it is the informal element that falls on the family and the close caregivers.
Yeah, totally. And we don't have any kind of training or support in that. And this is a really practical problem. Like lots of people need lifting, right? Need sort of medical equipment dealt with and so on. And we have no knowledge about how to do that. But people are discharged from hospital or whatever, and then they're just home, and good luck to you.
And they might get a care package, they might not.
They might get, exactly.
For 6 weeks or so.
And they also might refuse to have a care package. This is something that doesn't get talked about a lot. But, understandably, a lot of people who need care really don't feel comfortable with what they see as strangers doing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not an intractable problem, but it is one that's actually more difficult to solve than it seems on first glance. One
of the things you talk about in the book, which I also found very interesting, was you talk about love playing a role at being at the heart of policy formation. Now that, even now when I'm saying it, it sort of strikes me here. You sort of struck a chord with me here. What do you mean by that? I sort of get it intuitively. I think exactly I know what you're getting at. But can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I noticed when I was going through this that when I talked to friends of mine who kind of work in, think tanks and politics and stuff, that they had this idea in their mind that when it came to be their turn, that their parent was extremely sick, they would be able to carry on going to work because someone else would do the care for them.
Yes.
And maybe that's true, right? Maybe there'll be a national care service that does a lot of the care. It will never manage to do all of it. But had they forgotten that they love their parent or their spouse or their child who might be born with impairments, and therefore they will want to be able to care for them. And we have no right to provide care for our loved ones. If your parent gets diagnosed with a terminal illness or your spouse, you do not have the right to take paid leave from work to be with them.
That's very interesting that you mention that, because it's totally different from if you're having a child.
Right. And it's different across all the measures. So we have something called carers allowance in the UK, which is a benefit for people who are caring for 35 hours or more a week.
Yes.
And it's £76.75, which is £100 less than maternity pay, weekly maternity pay.
Yes.
Why?
Well, it's a fair point. And you also talk about that in relation to that caring should be classified as a category of work.
Yeah, I think, we do kind of have to look at it through that lens to be able to value it properly.
Because some people are also doing this full-time, some people are doing it part-time,
some
in
people
addition
are doing
to their
it
job.
Twice full-time.
That's right.
There's plenty of people doing it 24 hours a day. This is one of the things that I think a lot of the time people don't realise, that even if you had support from the council for, shifts in the daytime or even shifts at night, there's 24 hours in a day. And for a lot of people who are unwell, it is a 24-hour job,
Does it vary, do you think? I just wanted to put this to you. Have you noticed in your research in the course of writing the book any differences between different types of ethnic groups in the country in terms of how they deal? Are some people more inclined from certain groups to do this within the family more than others?
Yeah, there are differences in the research, and it's not entirely clear kind of what the cause of some of those differences are. So, for example, we know that Black and minority ethnic people, carers, are less likely to ask for support from formal services than white carers.
Okay.
But that might not be a kind of cultural value about family. That might be a distrust of the services, and we don't really know. Obviously, in cultures where living in intergenerational families is more common, then you're going to have more people on hand to be providing care, right, than if it's like a family of people where there's just one adult child in the vicinity.
Yes.
But it's one of the things that I'm really keen on in the book, and I looked into kind of global research and interviewed people around the world for this.
And you talk about this other lady who you spoke to in a completely different part of the world who had in Africa, was it?
No, she's in Kathmandu in Nepal.
In Kathmandu in Nepal, and you had this sort of kinship with her.
Yeah. So she was about my age. She's about my age, and she also cared for her mum who had cancer, and it was a kind of sad and beautiful, like a bittersweet encounter, right? Because we've had really similar experiences. She is in a country where care is assumed solely to be the responsibility of the family, right? No state
and women
support.
As well.
Yeah, and when we say the family, what we mean is women.
Which is another whole issue that we should unpick a little bit as well. Yeah. Because it does seem to disproportionately fall on women.
Yeah, and I always say, of course, there are men who are carers as well, but the majority of carers today remain women all around the world, including in countries like Sweden, which measure really well on gender equality on other things. So it's like a very interesting issue from that perspective. And it's a hangover from the days when fewer women worked, right? So we were kind of tarred as the free carer in the family. And that's now a kind of cultural assumption, even though, of course, as we know, we're all working now and we all need to work now.
Yeah, I mean, in my case, it was different because I was the primary caregiver because my sister's got 4 young kids and also juggling a career. So does as much as she can, but it's very, very difficult with very young children. And I didn't know. I mean, for 2 years, I was sort of doing this. And it only came to pass when things got really bad and I had to get the GP to come and do a home visit that we then found out that you could even get care support from the local council where we pay for this care. But I didn't even know you could access it or how to access it. I had no idea of the practicalities of it.
This is actually, I think, one of the key, really easy things that we could change, right? Is that when you're that family member who's around someone, why, when you're encountering health professionals, does no one just give you some information about your rights and about the things you could access? On that day that my mum's cancer was confirmed, I could have been given a booklet. I could have been. And I probably would have ignored it for 6 months while I tried to pretend it wasn't happening. And then I would have really found it useful. There are loads of things, loads of rights that I had that I didn't know about until I was researching the book, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
People just don't know about it.
And there is support out there and there are mechanisms out there as well that you can employ. But it's actually just knowing this. I had no idea at all until I was way into it.
Yeah.
Emily, fascinating conversation. I'm so glad you're here. So I'm talking to Emily Kenway, the journalist who's the author of the new book, Who Cares? The Hidden Crisis of Caregiving and How We Solve It. I couldn't think of a more important topic, particularly given that it's Carers Week this week. And she herself was the primary caregiver for her terminally ill mother. Now, Emily's going to be with me for the rest of this hour. She'll be taking your calls on caring. If you've been a carer for a loved one or have Emily's experiences have reminded you, just like they've reminded me about my own caring experiences. What kind of support have you found being a carer? Did you consider providing the care yourself, but decide it was too difficult? Did you get professional care? What are your own personal circumstances? How did it affect you? And if you were the recipient of care, what are your thoughts on the thing as well? How did you feel that it affected your family and how did it affect you? So call me on 0345 6060973, text me on 84850, or ask Alexa to send a comment to LBC. You're listening to Ali Miraj on LBC. It's 17 past 8.
This is LBC. Conversation, LBC with Ali Miraj.
You're listening to Ali Miraj on LBC. It's 19 minutes past 8, and I'm talking to Emily Kenway, the author of a new book, Who Cares? The Hidden Crisis of Caregiving and How We Solve It. I'm engaging in a fascinating discussion with her about her own experiences of caring for her terminally ill mother who had cancer, and my experiences of being a carer as well. And I'd love you to get involved in this conversation. It is Carers Week after all. Call me on 0345 6060973. Text me on 84850. You can ask Alexa to send a comment to LBC, and you can watch us live on Global Player as well. Let's go to our first call from Pauline in Oxford. Good evening, Pauline.
Good evening, Ali. And I really want to thank you for raising up people's awareness of Carers Week.
It's very important, very important. What would you like to say, Pauline?
I was listening to Emily. I'm going to go straight out and buy her book.
Yeah, it's a great book, great read.
And she was talking about carers allowance, and this is my topic of anger, I guess. I gave up full-time work to look after both my parents when they were 95, I think.
Mm-hmm.
93, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So quite old. My mother had dementia, and my father was in a wheelchair. So I couldn't work. I had to look after them. And as Emily stated, it's 24/7 in that sort of situation.
Yes.
So I went on Universal Credit and I tried to claim carers allowance. And that's when my troubles began. Carers allowance is, as you stated, £76 roughly a week. However, if you're in a position where you can't work and you're on Universal Credit, they don't take carers allowance as a wage. Usually, if you're on Universal Credit, for every £1 you earn, your Universal Credit goes down by 55 pence, but you get to keep some of the wage that you're earning. I was told carers allowance is not a wage. It's not a proper job.
Right.
Ouch. It's not a proper job. Therefore, you lose all of it.
Gosh, that is very... This comes back to, Emily, your point about it being categorised as a category of work.
Yeah, and it just being sort of massively under-supported. You know, we live in a world in which we need an income to survive.
Absolutely.
And yet we're pushing people into poverty. You know, carers are more likely to use food banks than non-carers. You know, it's that serious.
Are we just simply undervaluing what Pauline and so many millions of people in this country are doing unofficially every day.
We're undervaluing it, and we're also assuming that everyone is living in a household where there's another person earning an income that they can survive off, right? So it's that old school kind of male breadwinner, female carer mindset, which isn't the reality anymore, especially in a cost of living crisis.
Pauline, if you could speak to the policymakers who are listening to this conversation that we're having right now, what would you ask the government to do? What would you want?
What I'd want is a complete overhaul of carers' allowance.
Right.
What I worked out, I heard the national living wage is £10.42 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that title, living wage, means that if you're below £10.42 an hour, you haven't really got enough to live off.
That's right. I mean, even at £10.42, you'd be struggling, quite frankly, given where inflation is. But yes, you're right.
Okay, so I've calculated how much, because I'm on universal credit without carers' allowance because they take that off. Because I'm working 24/7 and I was looking after 2 people.
Yeah.
Forget about the amount of work and one with dementia. I am earning now 67 pence an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh. I mean,
now I'm going to say that again because some people won't believe me. It's 67 pence an hour.
You can't survive. I mean, it's just impossible. Impossible.
Now, we all know that nurses are underpaid, that NHS is underpaid. We know that paid carers are dreadfully underpaid. But I have a carer coming in half an hour a day to help me with my father, to wash him because he's an independent, proud man and he doesn't want to be washed by his daughter.
Exactly.
Love him. And this carer is earning more in that half an hour than I'm earning in the other 23 and a half hours that I'm caring for my father.
Yeah, Emily?
Yeah, I mean, this is unfortunately really common, and it does kind of beg a belief. What we see as well is that not only does it mean you're not earning money now, you don't have enough income now, it has massive knock-on effects for your future as well. Absolutely. You know, we're going to have a lot of people who are carers who are middle-aged now, who in their old age are in complete penury because they didn't have an income when they were caring.
That is a very important point. Pauline, thank you very much indeed for sharing your experience. I'm very grateful for your call. Paul in Battersea, a first-time caller. A very warm welcome, Paul. What would you like to say?
I would just like to say that I was a carer for my mum, years before she died, and my dad at the same time. Both my sisters were so busy with their children and trying to get them sorted in school and that. I was the one that was vacant to look after my parents. And it was a particularly hard job, but it was a wonderful job because they're my parents and I love them.
Yeah.
And my mum, she born me, and then I had TB meningitis, and she looked after me. And I remember her walking into the hospital, click, clock, and then I wanted to live again. And that happened to me twice. But anyway, my mum now was in a hospital at that time. Right. Hospital, her heart problem, and then she went to a hospice. Right. And the people coming in, checking her, doctors, etc. This is where you go to die, right?
Yes.
And she didn't like it one bit, and they were treating her like she was already gone. And she looked at me, and her tears in her eyes. She said, "Now you want to go home? I just want to go home." I said, "Mum, you know me, I'm quite a strong character, so I'm going to get you home. If I've got to carry you out of here, and I'm going to get you home."
Paul, what effect did it have? Because you've heard Emily talking about how it affected her and how it affects a lot of people. How did it affect you being the carer, primary caregiver?
How did it affect? Well, I was pleased that I could help her.
That's right. But
I was so pleased that I could help her. There's the best job in the world for me at that time. I
totally understand. Do you think it was all positive, or did it have any challenging elements to it for you personally?
Well, it cost me my savings, but it was worth every penny of it.
Emily?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm glad Paul brought up the kind of positive aspect, because actually, there's loads of research on this as well, that there are positive aspects of being a carer. And I think that I have experienced them as well. You know, we find that we're better able to kind of manage our lives. We have a better sense of what the meaning of life is, purpose, intention, all of these things that I'm very glad I've learned. And like Paul, I'm sure lots of people, we wouldn't want to not be there caring for our loved one. However, under current circumstances, it is too difficult, and it is, like I say, pushing people into poverty, mental health crises and so on. So how can we arrange things better so that we can unleash those benefits.
And also to support the carers themselves. We need to support carers. Paul, thank you very much indeed for your call. Francis in York, good evening.
Hi there. Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Pleasure.
What a topic.
Indeed.
You could speak for hours on it. Yeah. You could speak for hours on it. And so many things are racing through my mind while I'm listening to you. And I think, first of all, I was a carer for both of my parents. I'm now a carer just for Mum.
Okay.
And everything that Emily said in her introduction and has said throughout the programme, it's just a tick box. Yep, I agree with that. Yep. I mean, it's just the list goes on and on and on. I suppose the 2 or 3 things I'd like to mention. Mm-hmm. First of all, I continue to work 32 hours a week. Mm-hmm. I start work at 7. I finish at 5. Yep. I prepare the evening meal, and then I go over to my mum's house, and I sometimes do intimate care and company for her mental health as well, and financial checks and household checks and all this sort of thing. It's time consuming, of course. And I'm not complaining, but it's just for the powers that be to recognise this. Yes. And I don't want paying for it at all, but the level of care I give to my mum, and certainly the level of care that I gave to my father before he passed away, saved the system, for the want of a better word, a huge amount of money. Well, that's a very, very important point. Emily, just from a policymaker perspective, there are people like Francis doing this work themselves unpaid, saving the state a lot of money, potentially. Mm-hmm. How do we recognise that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first way I think we need to recognise it is actually with a livable carer's income, right?
That's a very good point.
When we say we're saving the state money, yes, that's true, but that's not without a cost, right? We've heard about people burning through their savings. I have a carer in my book who's using food banks, and people are in dire straits. So actually, probably we need to be saving the state a bit less because we need to be improving carers' allowance and making that livable.
I think that's a very important point. Francis, thank you very much indeed for your call. I'm talking about caring, personal caring, unpaid caring. These millions of people across the country that are the unsung heroes that actually provide personal care to their members of their family. I'm with the journalist and author of the new book, Emily Kenway, Who Cares? The Hidden Crisis of Caregiving and How We Solve It. Emily will be here for another half an hour taking your calls on being a carer and the challenges associated with providing care. You can call me on 0345 6060 973 or text me on 84850. You're listening to Ali Miraj on LBC. At 8:30, the news headlines with Daryl Jackson.
President Biden and the Prime Minister have signed an Atlantic Declaration at a meeting in the White House. The document covers increased cooperation on the current economic challenges and efforts to support the safe development of AI. A 3-year-old British child is among 4 injured during a stabbing at a park in the French Alps. 2 adults were also wounded in the attack earlier. The Met Office has issued an alert for thunderstorms ahead of what's supposed to be the warmest weekend of the year so far. It follows the first heat health warning of the year, which comes into force tomorrow morning until 9 a.m. on Monday. LBC weather staying dry and clear tonight for most. A few showers in the southwest of England and a low of 5 degrees.
This is LBC.
A rising
Miraj on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
You're listening to Ali Miraj on LBC. It's 8:33. I'm talking about caring, particularly unpaid caring, with Emily Kenway, the writer who's here and who's written this book here, Who Cares? The Hidden Crisis of Caregiving and How We Solve It. It's a very, very good read. And we would like to hear from you. Call us on 0345 6060 973. Text on 84850 and give your experiences of caring, being a carer, being a recipient of care. It would be very, very good to get you into this conversation because it is Carers Week after all, so very appropriate that we're having it. Now, Jerry in St Albans, I'll come to your call in just a second, but I just want to read you this text from Nathan in Newport. I cared for my mother for 6 years through ovarian cancer. I had no siblings, partner or children to help. I did it all myself. I received £69 a week. I would have been better claiming unemployment benefit. I loved her dearly and would go through it all again to have her back, but it destroyed my life. It was mentally and physically exhausting, and 4 years later, I'm still impacted by it, and I'm fearful of little pension I now have. That's Nathan from Newport. Just worth reflecting on. Jerry in St Albans, good evening.
Oh, hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Jerry, what would you like to say?
Well, basically, I mean, that's what I do kind of for a living. You know, I do it privately with dementia clients. And then, you know, I've just got home, literally, as I spoke to your colleague. And then at 9 o'clock, I'll be doing it all over again with my mum. And I'm exhausted, literally exhausted.
So you're caring professionally and you're also caring for your mother as well?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder, Jerry, if you share an experience of someone whose story I tell in the book, who's called Karen, and she's also a professional who works with elderly people, often with dementia, and looks after her parents with dementia. And she said to me, it's so much harder to do it for someone that you love than to do it at work.
To do it for other people. Yes. Yes, it is. You know, I make them laugh and they're happy, and you know, when I'm not going in, you know, they kind of like miss me not being there. But with my mum, it's a lot harder. Because
what makes it harder, Jerry? It's interesting.
I think because kind of like, you know, my dad doesn't understand what's really going on as much as I, you know, try and explain to him. And it's, yes, it is. I think maybe it could be just down to, I personally think it's just down to, because I'm so exhausted and all my energy has just gone and I've got to pick it up again. I've got very little left.
Well,
and then I've got to come home and, you know, sort the kids.
It's intense. It's intense as well, Jerry, isn't it? Because being a carer, it does involve, as Emily says, a lot of different responsibilities, including lifting and quite a lot of physical effort involved. So it must be exhausting to do that all day and then have to do it again when you come home.
Yes, exactly. You know, with doing that, you know, I now have the lower part of my back has no cartilage, so it's bone on bone.
Absolutely understand.
But I've still got to go to work because you're just gonna, well, you know, I've got a house to maintain and look after, and there's nothing out there for people like me, or, you know, what do I do? Nothing. Well, just got to keep on going, and I just hope that I don't end up in a wheelchair.
Is there support for people like Jerry?
I mean, you know, realistically, not really. You know, we've talked about carers allowance and how dire that is.
Yeah, no, there used to be a group when I was standing for Parliament many moons ago in Watford. There was a group called Carers Across Watford that used to actually, their job was to try and just give carers a bit of respite. I mean, it wasn't much, but just for like a couple of hours, even every few days or even once a week, just to even go out and do some shopping or watch a film or meet a friend, because the intensity of it is overwhelming.
I mean, so there are charities that support carers. There's one called Carers UK, which is UK-wide, and then there are ones in specific areas. I think respite is a really interesting example that gets to the heart of the problem with care, and maybe Jerry's experienced this, where you are, you really need a break. You're absolutely desperate for it. You're kind of wondering how it is that you're still standing up and moving. But for you to have that break, the level of organisation, you'd have to trust this person to come in. Your loved one would have to be okay with them. Dealing with someone with dementia, is a whole other level of that person being disoriented and so on. So it's very, very difficult.
It's not so easy to just get. Exactly. Jerry, thank you very much indeed for your call. Darren in Gravesend, good evening.
Good evening.
What would you like to say, Darren?
We're really exhausted. We've got 2 adults we're looking after in our house. They're our children.
Right.
Well, not children, but one's 35 and she's got cerebral palsy. She's tube-fed and hoisted everywhere. Mm-hmm. And my son is 33, and he's got ADHD, Crohn's, and various other disabilities. Yeah. And it's so tiring, every day.
Yeah.
Well, Emily, it just makes you think it's not just people looking after parents, but also in this case of Darren and Janine, his wife, looking after their kids.
Oh, yeah, of course. And children of all ages with impairments, right? So one of the things that gets overlooked in care today is, thankfully we've improved lifespan, right, of lots of diseases. But that does also mean that people are caring for decades for people with loads and loads of complex needs.
Yes.
That's not really supported in any reasonable way. Like, I would imagine that our caller has had, kind of not been able to earn properly, during this time.
Darren, is that the case?
Yes, right, yeah, because, I had to look after my son. My wife looks after the daughter, and, it does put a lot of pressure on both of us. 3 years ago, at the age of 53, I had a heart attack.
Gosh.
Yeah. And, unfortunately, so, carers have worse physical health overall. So things like heart disease, diabetes, they have higher mortality rates.
Because they're not taking care of themselves.
Well, they can't. Yeah,
they're no time.
And then also there are physical impacts of doing the care.
Of course.
And the stress. The heart attack. I've heard of strokes. I've heard of aneurysms, stress-induced. This is like a serious, arduous situation.
It is. Darren, thank you very much indeed, and to your wife Janine for sharing your story. Gillian in Liverpool, good evening.
Hi.
What would you like to say, Gillian?
Well, I live in Liverpool and I've got a daughter. She's 40 now, and she's type 1 diabetic and Down syndrome. Now, she is a handful in as much as I've got to watch her all the time. Mm-hmm. It's stressful and I get anxious, but I'm fine. Do you know what I mean? I'm absolutely fine. Mm-hmm. But previously, I'm a mature lady now. Previously, I used to work part-time, the minimal hours, I pick up carer's allowance. Mm-hmm. And the day the state gave me my state pension, they took the carer's allowance off me and they said, you can't have both.
Yeah, so carer's allowance stops at 67.
Really?
Even though...
I'm not a carer anymore.
Yeah, no, exactly. It is completely insane, even though a really substantial proportion of carers obviously are elderly because they're caring for elderly spouses.
Yeah.
And also we're going to be living longer, so that could be happening a lot longer.
Right, it's kind of a mind-blowing policy
That is very odd. If anyone from the government's listening in, feel free to dial in 0345 and 973 and tell us why this surely has to be looked at. I find that's appalling, actually.
Well, it's the pension age thing, right? So it's this assumption. And it adds, I wonder if the caller has found this, that it adds to one of the things that also gets overlooked, that care costs money. So as in, when you're caring for someone, there are things you have to buy and pay for, right? So if you're dealing with someone, for example, who's had a lot of chemotherapy or who's got dementia and so on, there'll be certain things that they can or will eat and certain things that they won't. You need heating on for people with cancer, dementia and so on, right?
And you also... You also need to do things for the quickest and the easiest.
Exactly.
And that's normally the dearest.
Yes, exactly. And you're exhausted, so you're going to choose the options that are easiest, the ready meals and so on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Gillian, thank you very much indeed for your call. Richard in Chichester, good evening.
Good evening. I'm a former carer. I looked after my dad who had dementia for 7 years at home.
Right.
And I basically had to drop everything I was doing. I had a job. I had my own business in central London, and my dad lived on the south coast, so I started coming down looking after him. But eventually I had to become his full-time carer because we couldn't find another solution. Mm-hmm. I knew that I didn't want to put him into a care home because I saw what they were like. My aunt had been in one, and she just didn't get the care that she needed. And I knew that my dad, because he had dementia, would be very disorientated, distressed and depressed by that. Yeah. So I had I really couldn't afford to do it, but I couldn't bear to watch my father just be neglected. So nobody else was going to look after him, so it fell on me. But the thing about caring is that you do it, you fall into it. You don't realize how...
That's a very good point, yeah.
How it's going to take over your life. You also don't realize how it's going to affect you mentally, physically, emotionally, psychologically.
It does.
It has a knock-on effect. It took me years to recover from being a carer because my dad died in my arms one night when I was brushing his teeth, putting him to bed. And that in itself was a very depressing thing. I grieved for about 4 years, and gradually I came around, got back on my feet, got my business going again. I was recently elected to the district council here in Chichester, but it took me 7 years to put my life back together again. It's a really tough thing to do. I also published a book called Who Cares?, which I've contacted Emily Kenway about. So we had lots of contributors, including Susan Hampshire, the actress, and the widow of George Melly. Diana wrote a chapter for us. Lots of people do this, and during the pandemic, Carers UK say that the unpaid carers in the UK saved the NHS £530 million a day because we were looking after these people who couldn't go into hospital, couldn't go into care homes, and we have an enormous economic impact. We make a huge contribution.
Yeah, indeed.
There's definitely a role in what you're saying for frontline professionals, I think, and I don't want to put more on the NHS, but when we're saying, I didn't realise I was a carer, and I mean, I didn't either as well, for probably 2 or 3 years, right? This is really common.
It creeps up on you, right?
It creeps up on you, but there is that role for those frontline professionals, the GPs that you're going to see on your own behalf, or that you're, seeing people with the loved one, to be able to say, hey, hang on, do you know that you are basically a carer, or you look like you're going to become one if this progresses in this way? Right. Here's the things you might want to know about, and that's a kind of missing piece at the moment.
It definitely does creep up on you, because I remember when I was dealing with my mother, it only crept up when you realise that the person's not able to actually physically do things like basic stuff, and then you actually think it sort of hits you like a thunderbolt. Like, actually, this is not. Yeah. This is going to be not sustainable in its present form.
Yeah, and you kind of hope it's going to change, right? There's this bit of your head that's like things are going to go back to normal, and then eventually you're like, that normal doesn't exist anymore.
Exactly. Richard, thank you very much indeed for your call. There's still time to get your calls in to Emily Kenway, who's joining me. She's written this book about Who Cares?, about unpaid carers and all the work that they do. It's a fascinating discussion we're having. She'll be with me until 9. You can call us on 0345 6060 973 or text on 84850. It's Ali Miraj on LBC. It's 8:46.
It's Colin Brazier on LBC.
Weeknights from 10.
Britain has lost control of legal migration.
Colin Brazier.
35 years in journalism have given me a nose to be suspicious.
On your radio.
My husband is not going to be with me much longer because he refused to control his type 2 diabetes.
On Global Player.
My own experience of helping to raise my 6 children, I would try and row him behind whatever the teacher was saying.
This is LBC.
It's time to get back
LBC with Ali Miraj. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
You're listening to Ali Miraj on LBC. It's 8:49 and I've still got Emily Kenway with me, the author of the new book, Who Cares? The Hidden Crisis of Caregiving and How We Solve It. Going to get to your call in a minute, Paul, but I just want to read this text from James in East Yorkshire. Dear Ali, enjoying your feature on unpaid caring. Regarding male carers, my wife became ill and unable to work 15 years ago. She was 41 years old. The financial, emotional and social pressures on us both have been enormous and impossible to quantify. Everything changes when your spouse gets seriously ill. Male carers are often more isolated precisely because the majority of caregivers are female. Interesting point. Thank you very much indeed for that, James. Paul in Preston, good evening.
Good evening. I hope you've all felt well.
Thank you, Paul. What would you like to say?
Right. I've been a carer for, about 30 years now. I started off with my son when he got cancer. Then I had to care for my daughter who has 3 types of epilepsy, who I'm still caring for. My stepson has depression, anxiety and epilepsy. And my stepdaughter has had a psychotic breakdown.
Gosh, that's a lot for you, yeah.
I've had 2 heart attacks. My wife's had an heart attack and 2 aneurysms. But now we're also sort of caring for my mother-in-law as well.
That must be a huge toll, Paul. What toll has that taken on you? How have you managed this? I mean, this is like a huge amount of responsibility and also, I guess, emotional impact as well. How has it affected you?
It hasn't really affected me. I'm
great.
the type of person that doesn't let anything get me down.
I'd love to learn from you.
I think it's interesting when we're hearing about this kind of, this series of illnesses and calamities that have happened. It does make you think we're kind of obsessed with this idea that the norm is to be healthy and unimpaired, right? Yes. And we do need to shift that. Actually, all of us are going to have patches of illness to a greater or lesser degree, yes, and impairment. We're all, we're infants at one point, we're elderly at one point, and there's all these patches in between where we need help. And it would be better if we could start understanding society as full of people who need help a lot of the time.
That's a complete cultural mindset shift, isn't it?
Totally, right, exactly. It's a shift from care being this kind of aberration, this interruption, yes, to being just an expectation, the water that we swim in.
And yeah, just an acceptance, a normalization of the fact that we're all going to be going through it at some point, either for our kids or for our elderly or for our spouses. We've heard so many different stories.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Point well made, Paul. Thank you very much indeed. And inspiring story, I must say. Kevin in Farnborough, good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Basically, I'm answering a question from a caller, I think it was about 3 or 4 calls ago, saying that when she becomes pension age,
yes,
all right, a carer's allowance stops. Mm-hmm. Right, that is the case. But because me and my wife, we care for each other, that's the same for us.
Right.
But you do go on to pension credits. So you will get it, but it's another benefit you'll have to apply for. In fact, I think DWP said to us, you still have to apply for it, but it's not ring-fenced, so she won't be losing it at all. All right? Why the DWP don't swap it straight over the pension credit, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, there are ways that you can top it up, but it's complicated. Yeah. It's not, everyone's not eligible. And it's a really good example. I think what Kevin's illustrating is that it's this kind of bureaucratic nightmare, right? And you're talking about people who are potentially elderly themselves sometimes and who are dealing with all of this stuff.
This bureaucracy is enough to drive anyone completely
and what
round
is
the bend.
67? You turn 67 and what? You don't become, you're not getting carers allowance. It doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. Kevin, thank you very much indeed for your call. Becky in Barnet, good evening.
Good evening. I literally was in an Uber on the way here and I nearly broke down in tears hearing about everyone's story.
Same here. I'm just about holding it together, quite honestly, and it's being filmed, so I have to. I'm doing my best, but Emily's seen me off camera. It's been a bit dicey on the edge here.
It's just absolutely heartbreaking, and it hits home for me because I'm one of 6 kids. Both my parents are disabled, and I think my mum's probably listening to this right now. And just the damage of not only being a carer for your parents, but being a non-paid carer, and then not having support from nearly anyone is very traumatizing, not only for my parents, because now you've got your kids looking after you, having to... I'm going a bit tearful, sorry.
And were you looking after your parents from when you were quite young yourself?
Yeah. So, from what I can remember, my dad's been disabled since for a very long time, and it is things of helping him get out to the car, helping him, do his washing, helping him wash, helping, with personal stuff, and it's very heartbreaking to see.
Yeah, and there are actually, hundreds of thousands of what are called young carers in the UK, which means under 18.
Absolutely.
Right? So we're talking about a kind of situation which shapes an entire life, right? From 10 years old or whatever.
You're absolutely right to raise that, Emily, and I'm glad we have not forgotten that as part of the conversation, because we don't focus on that enough either. That is really shaping a life, Absolutely. Becky, thank you. And I'm glad we all didn't break down. We're all close to it. Thanks a lot for that. Ranjit in Albury, good evening.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for taking my call.
Pleasure.
Today is 52 weeks since I lost my dad. And
sorry to hear that.
Tomorrow's the first anniversary.
Yeah.
Ali, you'll be aware that Asians tend to live together as an extended family.
Indeed.
So
indeed.
I've always looked after my dad. He had bad knees first. But I had help from my family. My dad got diagnosed with terminal cancer December 2021, Mm-hmm. And he had told me years ago, he says, Ranjit, no matter what happens, don't ever send me to an old people's home. And I made that promise for him, Financially, it wasn't a problem for me. Emotionally, it was terrible, and I'm feeling really like the last caller now because it's been a year today. It's coming back to me.
It's tough. It's really difficult.
And, I had to hide from the rest of my family, my mum, my brother, my children, that my dad was going to die.
Right.
I had to hide it from me. And then one day, I think my mum just sat me down and she said, sit down and stop telling me lies, tell me the truth. Right? Yeah. And then I did. And then the care we had, was towards the end when you were under the palliative care nurses. Yeah. And then the carers were coming. And, the carers, there was my mum, my brother, his wife, my wife, but me, emotionally, even now, because the end result was negative, that my dad passed away, it's even worse. Right.
I know, Ranjit. Yeah, I know, and it is very difficult, and I really appreciate you sharing your story with us this evening. Thank you very much indeed for your call, Dan. I just want to squeeze you in Dagenham. Please go ahead. We've got about a minute. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah. It's just a quick thing to correct something that was sort of said a little while ago. I'm a welfare benefit advisor. It's what I do, and I've done it for a long time.
Okay,
great.
With the carers allowance, they're quite right. The carers allowance does stop once somebody reaches state retirement pension age, simply because they are both income replacement benefits and what's referred to in the trade as overlapping benefits.
Right.
Yeah.
But they're income replacement benefits. You can't get 2 income replacement benefits.
Right.
You either get state retirement pension, and in fact you're forced to do that. You can't just say, I'm not going to take my state pension for now because I'll have the carers allowance instead. You can't do that. But then what happens is if somebody's eligible for pension credit, although they're not entitled to, what they have is they retain what's known as an underlying entitlement to carers allowance. So they won't get the carers allowance, but if they get in pension credit, what they will get is the carers premium, which will then further top up the pension credit and could in fact make them eligible for pension credit if their income's a little bit higher.
Okay.
So that.
Thank you, Dan.
It's about actually getting professional advice.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Dan. And very, very quickly, Elliot, I'm so sorry to rush you. In Southsea, but you've got about 30 seconds. Go for it.
Okay. My mother sadly passed away about 8 weeks ago. We had really poor quality care in the community. We sacked about 3 to 4 agencies, and then we undertook the care ourselves. And then sadly, she had to go to a care provider, and then she passed away in care care home, which is absolutely wonderful, thankfully. But listen to the previous listener saying that they didn't want their father to go into a care home. Yes. That's what she said as well. So I feel really guilty.
Well, Elliot, everyone's circumstances are different, and I'm sure we all do our best when it comes to these things. Thank you very much indeed for your call, Elliot. And Emily, thank you very much for coming in and talking so movingly about not only the book, but everything within it, and also for engaging with our callers. It really means a lot to us. And we've learnt a lot this hour. It's been an emotional one, but I'm very grateful to you. That was Emily Kenway, journalist and author of the new book, Who Cares? The Hidden Crisis of Caregiving and How We Solve It. I've given it several plugs, Emily, for very good reasons. So what a fascinating hour. Thanks a lot for all your calls on that. Now, coming up, after the news, the cereal giant Kellogg's has announced it's going to end its policy that everyone who works in its head office has to have a degree. The company says it wants to draw people from different backgrounds into its workforce. This comes at a time when we know that students starting their degrees can now expect to owe around £45,000 on average by the time they graduate. And that doesn't even count the 7% interest rates they have to pay on some of those student loans. The simple question for you is this, and I've been to university and I benefited from it, but now I'm not sure if I would do it if I had my time again. Is going to university really still worth it for most young people now?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden have agreed a new partnership to boost economic security for the UK and the